and it is great for me to be here. I love talking about the job search process. I love talking about um, helping people find jobs, and I have been involved in this industry for really going on 25 years. I probably need to update the slide a little bit. I have been certified as a global career development facilitator, which basically means I kind of know what I'm talking about. Um, I'm known as the project planning career coach. And so I really look at the job search process from a project management perspective and think about how do we use those skills in order to give us a real clear step-by-step methodology with good metrics that help us to see if we're moving forward in our search. I've helped a whole bunch of people, and just full disclosure, I am so glad to have Dennis on board with us. He has one of my clients that was referred to me, I think, a while back, and I'm loving having the chance to work with him. So I know Marty Latman very, very well, by the way, for those of you who know Marty from New Jersey. He and I have been working together as career coaches for quite a while. Bottom line is, I think I know what I'm talking about, and I think I can share some ideas with you that will be helpful for everyone. What I'd ask is that throughout the presentation, feel free to unmute yourself, ask your question as we go. I'd rather you get the question answered right away than we have to wait and go back and think about something that's already passed us by. Also, if you don't want to unmute yourself, that's okay. You can put it in the chat, and either myself or Adele will keep track of that and make sure we get your questions answered. Joyce did ask already, if you haven't done so yet, to put your contact information into the chat box so that everybody can network outside the meeting. And while it's not a requirement, I do prefer, if you can, to put your camera on, because I want to see those reactions from you to know if I'm getting through or if I need to adjust what I'm saying or doing. But again, if you don't want it on, that's up to you. So let's go ahead and dive in. Here is basically the topics we're going to cover tonight. And again, stop me, please. Don't make this an hour of me talking. Make it a conversation as we go. But we're going to look at what does it mean to be a consultative in our interview process. We'll talk about the preparation. We're going to look at what I call the 4-part interview process, some of the questions you want to ask and the way you want to answer those questions that you're given, and then talk a little bit about negotiation and follow-up. When we're done, you will have pretty much covered the entire interview process from start to finish, and hopefully have some new tidbits that you can take away with you. So let me just take a quick moment and show you that project planning process. And if you're familiar with project management at all, they talk a lot in milestones, which are really the major steps that we're going to take to get through the job search. So I've identified 7 primary milestones. My 8th milestone is really not something that you're doing consecutively throughout. The rest of the 7, though, we kind of work through them one at a time. The first 4 are all about preparing for your job search. And without that foundation in place, you're really not ready to move forward. So I would encourage you to think about, what is it that is your ikigai? What do you want to be when you grow up? And if you haven't figured that out yet, don't be worried, because we should be asking ourselves that question every 5 years and see if we're on the right path. We need to have targeted markets that we're going after in our job search. So think about, who are the target organizations you would want to look at, and how would you find out who they are? How would you research the information you need about them to be knowledgeable in talking about them in the interview process? And once we have those things, we can then create our branding materials, the resume, the LinkedIn profile, everything that goes into making a personal brand. And once we've got those things done, then we're ready to go start networking. And I break networking down into 2 different types. There's general networking with people who will introduce us to those hiring authorities. And we need to talk to a lot of those folks to make sure we're getting access to the hiring authority at the places we want to work. And then we need to be talking to those hiring authorities. And from a timeline perspective, a month or two of general networking should get us to hiring managers. A month or two of hiring manager conversations should lead to the interviews. And the interviews maybe take a month or two in process. And by that time, we should have an offer or two on the line.
Paula, can I
Now,
ask if you go back to the target markets, are you talking about size and industries that you're particularly familiar with?
it's a
Vertical?
great, yeah, it's a great question, Mark. And I'll just real quick talk about that because I want us to focus mostly on the interview for tonight.
Okay.
But yeah, your target market is defined by my perspective, three variables: a geography or location, an industry, and a role or function. And you can break down that industry however you wish. Um, just as a quick aside on that space, if I were to go look for a full-time job right now, the primary industry is post-secondary education. But we can look at post-secondary education as a larger group of 3 or 4 smaller subsets, right? Could be public 4-year universities, public 2-year colleges, private universities or colleges, and the for-profit trade school sector. All 4 of those make up post-secondary education. Now, I know some people who will break down their industry, let's say financial services, and they'll say, no, I want to work for the small, local, less than 150, 200 employees, maybe only 5 billion or so in assets. I want to work for that size organization. Whereas other people may say, no, I want the multinational global financial institution with, hundreds of billions of assets and thousands of employees. Well, those would be 2 completely different markets. So you want to look at them differently and react to them differently. So hopefully that's a quick snapshot and gives you a quick sense there for you, Mark. Excuse me. But one other just quick comment on the process is you notice that we're going after one target market at a time. But as we start to finish with our general networking here and are talking to the hiring managers in our first target market, we're now doing the general networking in our second target market. The idea being I want to constantly refill my sales funnel with more leads to be going after so that I never run out of people to talk to. So overview, real fast, that's what a targeted or a project planned job search would look like. And if you want more information on that, by all means, ask me or talk to Dennis, because he's been going through it with me, right, Dennis?
Absolutely, and I'm happy to share my experience and network with anybody on the call. So I put my information in the chat. Please reach out to me. I'll just say off the bat, I can attest I've applied so much of this in the last several weeks, and my traction has moved exponentially.
Thank you, Dennis. Appreciate that. And I promise you, I didn't pay him to say that.
Not a paid advertisement, exactly.
Now, just one other side note. When you see me looking this way, I'm looking at my screen that has all of your pretty faces on it. When you see me looking this way, I'm looking at the screen that has my slide. The camera's here. I'm going to try and stay focused here for you, though. So the first thing I want us to think about in terms of our 13 tips to get killer interviews is we need to think and act like a consultant as we're going through the entire job search process, but especially as it pertains to the interview. Think about those skills when you've hired consultants. What are the things that make the successful ones successful? Right? Well, they're constantly thinking like the boss or the interviewer. They're putting themselves in that person's shoes and wanting to figure out, what does this person need from me and how can I provide it? Right? We need to do that when we're interviewing. Frankly, we need to do that in our entire job search. Think like the hiring authority, act like the hiring authority, and respond to them as if you were the hiring authority. Consultants are always selling themselves. Now, we don't want to be so overboard and overt that what we're doing is constantly just saying, buy from me, buy from me. right? But we do want to make sure that everybody we come in contact with has a really positive experience and sees us as the problem solver that they need. So the other thing that consultants are constantly doing is they're thinking about what's the next problem this employer is going to have, and how can I be seen as the one to solve that problem? Because that's going to keep me employed. So we all need to be doing something similar. And I don't know if you've ever heard it said, but I've had several managers come back to me and say, Paul, I appreciate knowing the problem, but you need to tell me what the solution is. So don't just come with the problems, come with the solutions, please. And if we're showing the solutions without giving away the store, but if we're showing the solutions in the interview, we're showing the interviewer that we are the person who can do the job they need done. And of course, we want to always showcase our results. Anybody have any thoughts, questions, or comments on this concept of being a consultant? Good. That's probably the one place I don't want to hear that you have any conversation. But going forward, I want to hear your thoughts. Okay. So when we're in the interview, let's always make sure it's a two-way conversation. I remember I was on one interview where it was actually in education, and I was sitting across from a PhD, and I said, "Hi, Steve. It's nice to meet you. Glad to have the opportunity to talk to you. I'm sorry, my name is Dr. Phillips." Oh, okay. Well, you're welcome to call me by my first name, but glad to meet you, Dr. Phillips. Hope I didn't upset you. Says something about the interviewer when they want to keep it that formal. I've been and have clients who have been on interviews where it's been, the ninth degree. Oh, I'm going to pepper you with all my questions, and I'm going to take 45 minutes of our 60 minutes with my questions. When I'm done, you'll have an opportunity to ask your one, maybe two questions, because I don't have time for you to ask more than that. That's not a real good interview process either. So we want the interview to be a conversation. It should be a peer relationship. It should be that you do about 60%. It'd be nice if it was 50% of the talking, but you should be doing probably 60% of the talking. They should be doing 40%. Remember, the interview is the opportunity for both sides to get to know each other. So you need to ask questions and get information just as much as they do. So make it that conversation. We always want to use open-ended questions. Anybody not know what's meant by an open-ended question, please? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands or shaking heads, so good. And as
Hey,
much as
Paul, but a quick question around that interview. What
yeah,
happened? Do you have any advice lately? I've heard of a couple of situations where the interviewee encountered a very aggressive and kind of hostile interviewer, being really, really aggressive about their background and target market and what their purpose was. How do you respond to that type of attitude?
it's a good question, Dennis. And let me just preface it by saying, look, how many of you have had training in how to interview for a position? Meaning you are the interviewer interviewing candidates. How many of you have been trained to be a good interviewer, right? A couple, right? Those are progressive companies that do that. Most hiring managers have never been trained how to conduct an interview properly. And then there's those that just want to play mind games. And so they'll be purposefully aggressive to see if they can rattle you, for example, Dennis. Or they'll ask those ridiculous questions like, if you were an animal, what animal would you be? I mean, there's all kinds of games people are playing, mostly because they don't know how not to. And if they were taught how to be a good interview, they probably wouldn't do those things. So I start by, I don't want to make the situation worse. If I've got an aggressive interviewer, I'm just going to calmly sit back and respond to their questions. But another response could be to mimic their behavior. As a general rule, a great way to manage interpersonal, right, a interpersonal interaction. Sorry, my tongue's not working that well today. Is just to mimic whatever that other person's doing, right? So if they're aggressive towards you, you could be aggressive back. I would argue in that specific situation, Dennis, that you're getting an aggressive interviewer. Do you want to work for that person? And so what do you have to lose? Now you may say, yeah, I do want to work for them, or I still want to work for that company. So then you're going to be a little more circumspect about your response. But if not, hey, give it right back to them. It'll be interesting to see how they respond. In the end, that's just a bad interviewer, if you ask me.
Agreed. Thank you.
Sure. Anything else? So we need to do our preparation, and I can spend an hour just talking about preparation, but let me just show you briefly here. This sheet would be what I put on my notepad, or I have prepared in front of me when I go to an interview. So part of the research I'm going to do is what is the information about the company that I want to make sure to bring up as a part of the interview. I recently did a poll on LinkedIn. I don't know if any of you saw it, asking HR professionals specifically, but anybody could answer. What is the number one mistake candidates make in the interview? And the number one answer with more than 50% of the responses was people come to the interview unprepared. There were 3 other responses, none of which had more than 15% of the respondents, right? So preparation is the number one most important thing that HR professionals are saying we need to do more of. So you need to go to the company website. You need to read the company's marketing materials. In this financial space, I'd argue you need to, especially for those publicly traded companies, be reading their filings and know what's going on in that organization when you go to the interview. There's going to be some information that you want to make sure you don't forget. That's the stuff that I'm going to put here in this section of the paper.
Paul, if I may, how do HR managers and/or executives feel about you showing up sort of with cheat sheets in your hand?
A couple of thoughts there, Howard. Number one, if it's a video interview, you can have all the cheat sheets you want and nobody's going to see it, right? But number two, typically I don't have mine out, so I can't handily just use it as a prop, but I'm going to go with my portfolio in hand. And inside my portfolio is going to be my notepad, right? And this paper, right, is what's going to be in my notepad. So typically I'll just ask, hey, I've got a lot of questions and information that I want to keep track of. Do you mind if I take notes during the conversation? Once out of all the people I've prepped for interviews and all the interviews I've ever been on, only once have I ever had an interviewer say, no, you can't take notes. By the way, it was that same PhD that said, you can call me doctor. Okay. So in most cases, it's not going to be an issue, but you do want to just ask, do you mind if I take notes during our conversation? And then that gives you the permission to open up your portfolio, have your cheat sheet right there in front of you. How much you show them of it is up to you. I don't think you need to show them at all. Just as they're keeping their notes in private, you can keep your notes private too. Helpful?
One thing. This is David Mallet, real quickly.
Go ahead, David.
And by the way, I've been in the market for 6 months, so you might want to take my advice with a grain of salt. But one just tip that I use for interviews, whether it's Zoom or in person, is I literally just have one piece of paper, 10 words or 10 2 or 3 word phrases, just words that I want to get out, whether it's excited, whether it's partner, whether it's build, just things that I want to make sure, just words and branding words that I want to make sure to spit out. So those are the only things that I have on a piece of paper in front of me. Hopefully the rest I can remember enough.
And David, I love that you're using keywords and phrases, because I agree with that. We don't want to have a whole dissertation of written out in terms of research. Keywords or key phrases, something to jog your memory is what you want there. I agree. The same thing.
Can I share what I did with I think everyone's heard of the SOAR or PAR stories, etc. What I did with each of those, right along the lines of the gentleman who just was commenting before, I think David, was I named each one of those stories. So I have a moniker in my head. I know of when someone asks a question, I think of the turnaround, and I know that story number 3 that I do know. As you said, I have it in my head, but I keep that outline in front of me of those 6 or 7 reference points of those stories.
Perfect. And I'll do the same with questions, right? So I want to make sure the questions and the way I look at the questions I want to ask is this. By the time I'm done with this interview, if I don't have these 3, 4, 5 questions answered, I cannot say yes to this job, right? So for this interview, what are the 3 things, the 5 things that are must-have information? Those are the questions that I'm going to write there, probably in the term of a phrase or a keyword, so that I don't forget to ask those. But also note what it kind of says over here on the side. The only question that's not included there is anything related to compensation, because the only time we want to talk compensation is when we get to the job offer. Prior to that, we really don't have the information necessary to adequately provide any kind of information on compensation. So we want to avoid that conversation. And again, we can do a whole workshop just on negotiating, but that's the number 1 rule, and you probably know it better than I. The first one who gives a number loses, so don't you be the loser. So that's the kind of stuff I'm going to be doing to prepare for the interview. I'm going to be researching the company. I'm going to be researching the people I'll be talking to know enough about them that I can find those commonalities and speak in the terms that are going to be relatable to them. Questions on preparation. So now let's talk about the 4-step interview process as I see it. And we're going to go into each one of these steps, but there's actually 5 of the tips we're going to cover in talking about those 4 steps. So the first of those 4 tips, or 5 tips, tip number 4 is the first qualifier. So when we look at this preparation sheet, I've got my 4 steps listed here so I don't forget them as well. The first step is all about the job. I want you to tell me exactly what I need to know so that I can answer the questions you need the most information about. And I'll give you an example of this. I was interviewing for VP of sales position. My first interview was with the executive VP, who would be my direct report. His request was, when I asked, hey, tell me, what are the key duties and responsibilities from your perspective for this position? I mean, I've read the job description, but I want to know from you, what's most important about the job to you? And his response was, Paul, I need to see the revenue. I need you to whip this team, the sales team, in shape and get the money. It's all about generating the money. So I now knew how to focus all of my answers with that interview, right? My second interview was with the VP of HR. Asked, what are the key duties and qualifications you're looking for? Paul, it's all about risk management. I don't want to see our clients suing us because we did something wrong with the aircraft. I don't want my employees suing us. It's all about risk management. How are you going to mitigate risk? I knew how to answer those questions. Totally different interview from my boss, though, right? The third interview was with the chairman / president of the company. Now, at the time, I was 30, 35 years old. He was 55, 60. Our customers were the Fortune 500. His friends were the CEOs, the presidents, and the chairman of the board of the Fortune 1000. So he sees this young kid coming into his office and he says, Paul, I need to know you're not going to embarrass me and make a fool of me or our company in front of my friends, all of these high-powered guys and gals in the Fortune 1000. Completely different set of answers and responses to him, right? So I asked these questions or something like them right away in every single interview. And the way we do that is, so Paul, tell me about yourself, right? Typical first question. So I give my 2-minute pitch focused on the job, and then I finish with something similar to, but you know, I could talk about myself forever and never really give you the information you most need. So let me ask you, what are the key performance indicators for this role? And if you had to define your ideal qualifications or the qualifications of your ideal candidate, what would that be? And immediately I'm getting all the information I need so I know how to respond to everything else in the interview. Questions on this first qualifier, first step of the interview?
What I find
Remember,
interesting on
go
this
ahead,
is how
Sam.
you're ending that. What I find interesting is how you're ending the first question with a question back, right? So it's not.
Absolutely. Go ahead, finish. I'm sorry.
I like that approach because it, it sets you up, but then it also doesn't, it'll kill any like maybe silent, silent patches, right? It'll keep the conversation going because in a sense you're throwing the conversation back.
And what's happening, Dorothy, is I'm taking control of the interview at this point, right? Because I'm the one that's directing the conversation now. And wherever possible, without being so overt and obvious that, haha, I'm in charge now, not you, right? I want to be in charge. I want to be in control of the interview because then I'm going to know what's coming next and how I need to respond to it, right? So yes, a part of that conversational tone, that 50-50, 60-40 split in who's doing all the talking is going to be after I answer a question, sometimes I need to ask a question to follow up with it. And it could be a question on the same topic or something that's changing the topic. But you want that back and forth banter to take place. Thank you. So remember, as I said with the consulting, it's all about the hiring authority. It's not about you. Everything about the interview is what are you going to do for me, not what I as the employer am going to do for you. So constantly be framing all of your answers from the perspective of this is how I can help you solve your problems, right? So we're always looking at the interviewer's needs, which means what is the question behind the question they're asking? And how do I respond to that, right? I want to always keep my tone positive and upbeat and enthusiastic. Show that energy, especially for those of us who are concerned about age discrimination. The more energy we put into the interview, the younger we feel and the younger we come across. Now, I'm not saying be bouncing off the walls, right? But absolutely put that energy and excitement into the interview. So what are some of the typical questions that y'all have been asked on some interviews? Anybody want to throw out a couple?
People ask, I'm a corporate lawyer, ask about moves, the frequency of moves.
Yeah. And how would you respond to that?
I usually say the first section of my career, I was at, Cravath and White and Case for, 20 years. And then the second half has been much more entrepreneurial. I've taken different opportunities as they came along.
That's great. I love the way you use the term. It's been much more entrepreneurial. I'm taking the interviews, the opportunities that come along. And just to be clear, the Gen Zs, especially the younger Gen Ys, if you're not promoting me in 18 to 24 months, I'm gone by 30 months. So there's a lot more movement in the job market today, in the world of employment today, than there has ever been before. Excuse me. And that's the way a lot of them are finding their way up the ladder, is by just bouncing from company to company to company. So the expectation today is that you're not going to be hanging around for a long time in most cases. They're going to say, we want you here for the next 10 years. But the truth of the matter is, the day you stop solving problems for me and you start to become my problem, that's the last day you're employed. What other questions are you getting? Anybody?
I've seen a lot of the situational questions, like tell me about a situation when you've handled a problem, or tell me, something about a big project. And where I sometimes not struggle is, giving the right answer without divulging company, like proprietary information. Like that's kind of where I've, tried to, where I've struggled a little bit framing those.
And while I want to get more questions from you, that was just such a perfect lead in, Dorothy, that I'm going to come back to Dennis's reference to the SOAR or STAR stories. I call them CAR stories, but we want to have all of our responses to all of our questions in this format. And if you do it right and you prepare them in advance, then you will have the answers and you won't be divulging that corporate secret that you can't divulge, right? So one of the things you want to do, think about all of your life's accomplishments, and in particular, those that are business related. Write out that list of accomplishments, prioritize it. Then for at least the top 5 or 10, write out the story behind it using this format of SOAR or CAR, PAR, STAR. The concept is the same, right? I'm going to give the situation or the challenge. I'm going to give the actions. I'm going to give the results. I may add the value or the benefit to the employer in there as well. Once you've written those stories out, the result statement becomes the bullet on your resume. Now, the interviewer who's reading your resume is going to start taking some of their behavioral questions or their situational questions from your resume. Gee, I see that you led the company through a $20 million merger and came out the other side with a stock price that was 10% higher. How'd you do that? Right? Now you've got the story already in your head written down, right, Dennis? And so you know what you're going to say, and you can spit it right out without any concerns or questions. Do you see how that's going to help you, Dorothy?
I do.
Anybody else have questions on this?
I would just say from a practical perspective, what I've been doing with it is taking those stories, and when I know I have an interview or even a meeting with someone, like a networking meeting, I read them beforehand, and it reacquaints me to the context of them. And then I just, as I said earlier, keep that little outline of 6 bullet points that have the name of each of them, and it refreshes my mind.
Perfect. And one of the things that I love about working with Dennis and with most of the people from the FANG organization that I've dealt with, because I've spoken now and worked with members of FANG from across the country, y'all are like sponges. You take what we have to say as coaches and you really internalize it and put it to the best use possible. Now, I'm not saying that I'm the expert and perfect on everything, right? But you'll take from any presentation you hear some tidbit and utilize it the way that's going to work best for you. And I'm so glad to have that opportunity and to see that you're well able to do that. Okay, so let's move to the other side of the conversation now, right? We've talked a little bit about how are you going to respond to their questions, and what questions are they going to ask? Now I want to hear, what are some of the questions you're asking when you interview?
I think for me, it's some of the things you've covered around, the successful candidate in the job. Like what makes someone successful in this role? What are the key qualities you're looking for? That kind of thing.
Great. What else? Go ahead, Ron.
I'd like to ask, what are 3 of the top problems you'd like solved by filling this position? Those are
Perfect.
my go-to questions.
I like that. I might also word it as, what are my key performance indicators for the first 60 and 90 days, right? What do you want me to accomplish right off the bat? Right. Good. What else? Oops, sorry. Yep. So here's a list of some of the other questions that I like to ask. Was somebody going to chime in? Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I'm interviewing with banks for a banking role, and I oftentimes ask, how do you differentiate yourself from the competition in the marketplace?
Love it, David. Absolutely love that question. There's no reason why you can't or should not viewer on the hot seat a little bit and have them explain to you why you should take their job. So I love that question. Any of the questions on the screen here stand out to you as particularly good or concerning or difficult to ask? Any comments on any of these questions? I always like to ask about the incumbent. What made them successful? What made them fail? So I know what not to do, and I can do more or better of what the right thing is to do, right? I do like to ask questions like the organization's most significant challenges. Now, I should know the answer. I'm sure Adele would say, as a good lawyer, I never ask a question that I don't already know the answer to, right? But that we want to be the same way in an interview. However, the goal of asking the question in the interview is to validate the information that we've gotten in the past and understand where's the truth. See if we can figure out what's going right and wrong. Right? So the third step of the interview process is tip number 8. And here we're getting to what we call in sales the trial close. So at this point in the interview, we know we're there because the interviewer says, so, hey, Paul, do you have any more questions for me? That's my cue. Okay, he's done, she's done. It's time to move on. They want to end this thing, right? So the wrong answer to, do you have any questions for me, of course, is no, I have no questions. But hopefully you've done a really good job throughout the interview of having that two-way conversation. And you've asked, if not all, almost all of those 4 or 5 questions you need answered by the end of this interview. So here's your chance to ask whatever 1 or 2 questions still remain that you didn't get answered already. And then after that, I'm still going to say, I have just 2 more questions I really would like to get from you. First, tell me, what do you like about me as a candidate for this position? Smile, shake your head. What do you like about me as a candidate for this position? In the trial close, we flipped. Remember, in the first step, it's all about the job. Now it's all about the candidate. It's all about me. I want to know, am I going to be the person you hire? So I want to find out, what are the reasons why you're going to say yes to hiring me? And hopefully you're going to give me 4, 5, 6 reasons why I'm the right person for this job. Then I'm going to ask, hey, is there anything that would prevent you from moving me forward in the process? Is there any reason why you would not be comfortable hiring me for this job? You can ask the question in a bunch of different ways. The key here is, tell me the reasons you're going to say no. if you ask these two questions and you get honest answers, and usually you will, you're going to know right then and there whether or not you're moving forward in this position. How many times have you interviewed somewhere and you've never heard back? I mean, I remember there was a job I interviewed for 23 years ago. I still haven't heard from the hiring manager. Do you think I'm going to get that job? Right? No, obviously not. But if I had asked these questions, I would know right there at the time of the interview whether or not I'm likely to move forward. So I want to get that information. John, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. So when you ask for objections, do you try to persuade them otherwise?
Great question. And the answer is absolutely yes. So, Paul, we're really looking for somebody who has a little more managerial skill than what you're demonstrating. Oh my gosh, did I not explain that well enough? Well, let me give you more information. Right? Or I might even go so far as to say, gee, my managerial skills, is there anything specifically that you're concerned about? Yeah, really, I'm not sure that you can handle the kind of conflict that we have in our office. Oh, well, tell me a little bit about that conflict and let me answer how I'll respond to it. Right? So, yeah, I'm going to definitely ask for that information and then respond back, turning that negative back around, making it a positive is my goal. Great question, John. Anything else, anybody? No one's going to say, Paul, that's being too aggressive? Really? Really? Cool. There's the first group that gets it.
Actually,
So Paul, I have one
I was
question
this
on
close
that.
to saying that.
Okay, David, go ahead, Howard.
In the climate we sort of live in today, with people being, I don't want to use the word politically correct, but I guess that's that, and being afraid of ramifications of being candid. Do you think you're going to always get a candid answer?
So you will definitely get a candid answer to the first question, what do you like about me? Yes. The second question depends on how well trained the interviewer is. Usually you'll get some kind of a response. Oftentimes the response, if there is a concern, will be the concern. Typically the concern that comes up is, I just don't have enough information about this topic, right? Well, that's not really a negative. That's just, you need more information. I'm happy to give you more information. And so now but if you didn't ask the question and didn't know that that was still sitting there unanswered, you may get looked over because somebody else answered the question, right? So that's why I want to do it. Now, David, let's come back. Tell me what it is that you think might feel aggressive about this.
I guess the first one doesn't strike me as too aggressive. The second one feels aggressive and a little pushy. I just wonder if a softer sell approach might work better for some potential employers.
So you're absolutely right that there may be other ways to ask the same question to get at the same information that you're more comfortable with, or that based on your read of the interviewer, they're going to be more comfortable with. Go ahead and do it. The most important piece here is get the information. Because if you don't get it, you're just not going to know what's going to happen next. And you're not going to know why you got passed over. Right? So, sure, I'd love to understand if there's anything about me as a candidate that you might not feel comfortable with. Right? I can ask the question 100 different ways, but I can still get at it and get the information that I need. So I would, and I'm going to say this to you, David. Try it a couple of times.
I was going to say, you've convinced me to give it a try. I absolutely will.
Paul, but I think you hit the nail on the head there when you said, the question was, the question I think you posed to this group was, is this statement on the screen aggressive? And I would agree. I think it's a little bit aggressive, but when you reword it the way you just did, it's not. You need to get to the answer to this question. But I would certainly, as David and others are saying, I would rephrase
Yep.
it much.
Yeah, excellent. All right, so tip 9, we're closing the interview. We're done. Step 4 of the interview process. Ask for the job. Now, here again, we want to be assertive, but not aggressive, right? But we do want to ask for the job. I would probably end most interviews something like this. Hey, David, thank you so much for the time. I really love the company and the way you described the way the company takes care of their employees. That's the kind of place that I want to work for. Based on your response that I've got these 5 reasons why I'm the right person for the job, and you really didn't come up with reasons that were no, it seems like I really can do this job. I believe I can. I hope you do as well. Why don't we set up our next conversation at this point? Well, we've got 3 or 4 more candidates to interview. I get it. I totally understand. How long do you think it's going to take before you're done with those other interviews? Probably by next Friday. Fantastic. If I've not heard from you by Friday, can I give you a call Monday morning? This is one of the other places where you want to be taking some control of the interview process. Now, think about the number of times you've interviewed people for roles in your organization. You're interviewing 3, 4, 5 candidates to select one. Have you personally gone back and contacted all those that were not selected and said thanks, but no? You probably didn't. How many times have you interviewed for a job and never heard back, right? So this is a place where by setting up that next conversation, you are able to take control. And you're doing it in the timeline that's appropriate to them. So listen, you're going to be done interviewing next Friday. Great. Monday's a holiday. Should I give you a call maybe Tuesday afternoon after you've gotten back in the office, had a chance to get through those emails and things, and check in on where you stand on the process, see where I'm at? Make sure.
What's interesting about this one, I find interesting about this one is usually it's a panel, right? You're going to be meeting with multiple people as you go through the tiers. It's like one person, and you meet another 3 or 4 people, and you meet another 3 or 4 people. So it's not like you're, and then they get back together, and then somebody, a representative reaches out for you. It's usually not that you're speaking, like it's a hiring person, and then there's a panel. So it would be.
And Dorothy, what I've done when I've been in panel interviews and what I've had clients do, they'll go to each person on the panel. Tell me, what do you like about me as a candidate for this job? What do you like about me as a candidate for this job? Is there any reason why you're not going to push my name forward? Is there anything that you still need to know in order to take me to the next step? And we'll ask every single person, just like we ask every person that first question, the first qualifier. I'm going to ask every person that third step, the trial close. And then I'm going to go to the key person who's the decision maker and say, listen, based on the response, seems like I might be the right guy for this job. Can we take the next step now?
Yeah, and then even if it's not all, because when I say panel, I also mean like multiple within one day, where it's from 1 to 2.
And if they are multiple individual interviews, all the more reason for you to go through this process with each one of them, because then you want each one of them going back to the hiring manager and saying, holy crap, man, Dorothy is the perfect person for this job.
Yep.
So I want to make sure that I'm doing 2 things to close out the interview. I'm asking for that next conversation. And the way you want to think about that is this. The day the conversation ends is the day you've lost the opportunity. But if you keep the conversation going, even if they say no to you, Now, down the road, they may come back to you because you're still talking to the hiring manager. Do you have a thought, Mark?
Oh, I have a question. Have you seen an increasing trend towards 30-minute interviews? And I ask because it seems like they're just lining us up. They want to get through as many of us as possible, and then kind of so I feel we have to kind of tweak our message a little bit in terms of differentiating ourselves from. They could just see their schedule. They have
Right.
lines of people that they want to go through.
And you're right, Mark, that depending on the position, the people that you're talking to, on how they're organizing the interview process, it could be very well regimented and timed interview pieces. I still want to go through these 4 steps.
Sure.
I'm just going to be more specific and truncated, I guess, in the way that I approach them. So, instead of having 5 questions that I might ask, I may only ask 2 or 3 of you. And then when I get to Dennis, I may ask 2 or 3 that I didn't ask you. And then when I get to Dorothy, I may ask 2 or 3 that I've already asked one of each of you or something like that. Right. But I'm still going to ask some questions, excuse me, and compare those answers to each other so I can see, where the truth really lies in it. But yes, you do need to be aware of the time limits of the interviewer. Now, I've seen in most cases with many of my clients as well, if you're the right person for the job and the interviewer is enjoying the conversation, they don't care that they've got a 30-minute limit.
Yeah.
They're going to go beyond because they're really excited and happy to be talking to you, and that would certainly be a good sign. But you want to be aware of it and be appropriate about the way you approach their time. Ron, go ahead.
I wanted to add to what Mark was asking about. I think the difference we're talking about is maybe a screening.
So Ron, your internet's a little weak and you're coming in a little choppy.
Oh, I'm sorry. Hold on 1 second. Is that a little bit better?
Little bit. Go ahead.
Okay. I think what Mark was talking about, I think, and I have a screening interview tomorrow, is the difference between sitting in front of a hiring manager and then sitting in front of a screening interviewer, human resources recruiter for that particular company. I feel like I'm one of 20 interviews that may go tomorrow based on the way the schedule is set up.
I'm still, you're breaking up again, so I'm going to stop you. I'm still going to go through this 4-step process, but again, I may adjust the questions that I ask or the detail of the stories I give in order to meet the needs of the interviewer. But, when I'm talking to a third-party recruiter even, they need to be able to sell me, so I need to sell them on me.
So Paul, we have 2 questions, one from Ron and one from Dennis. Ron, do you want to go ahead?
Yes, I'm sorry. I think my internet is a little unstable, so I apologize. I think Mark was talking.
Yeah, Ron, we're going to have to move on. I'm sorry, you're just not coming through. Dennis, did you have a question?
Not a question, but a comment. I was just going to say, I wouldn't, to the group, I would try not to overthink the brevity of a call if it's reduced to 30 minutes. Just know that you need to maximize it. If you kind of try to look at it from another perspective, the person you're talking to needs help and is looking to recruit someone.
Yes.
Probably at a premium, and they're looking to they're breaking 30 minutes away from their schedule. It's probably pretty valuable. So I try to look at it as the glass half full on that side and just make sure I get in, be succinct, punchy, and know my next steps.
Perfect. Ron, type your question in if I've not answered it well enough yet, and then we'll address it. In the meantime, I'm going to move on. Most of y'all know this, but a lot of people, even at the higher levels, still have been asking me about how to dress for. Oh, I'm sorry, that's the next slide. But even this one, the do's and don'ts really are pretty typical and pretty standard. Be affirmative, be assertive. good handshake, good eye contact, enthusiasm. Make sure, by the way, do bring your phone with you, because when you go to make that next conversation date, you're going to put it in your calendar. Even if you pretend, you're going to put it on your calendar in the phone, right? Shows that you're technology capable, shows that you're younger in the way you approach the world. Okay. But do put it in airplane mode because you don't want all the interruptions. David, assertive versus aggressive, right? We don't want to be aggressive, but we do need to be assertive. Okay. And obviously you don't want to eat or drink or any of those things. Dressing for the interview. The key here is, look, everybody's dressed casual for the most part these days. But even within business casual, there's different definitions of what that means. No matter what, I still want to dress at least one step above what the interviewer's expectations are. When I was working in corporate aviation, I would go into the director of aviation's office or the chief pilot's office. They're in the suit. They can be talking to the chairman or the CEO or the president at the drop of a dime, getting in the airplane with them and taking them off someplace. I need to dress to their level as the salesman talking to them. Right? So I would go in dressed like this guy in the picture with my suit and tie and the pocket square and the whole 9 yards. I'd leave the chief pilot's office, and my next visit would be with the chief maintenance technician for that flight department. And he's typically down on the hangar floor with his sleeves rolled up, grease up to his elbows, dirty, right? And if I showed up in my 3-piece suit, he'd say, "Who the hell are you and why are you here?" Right? So what I do, loosen my tie, unbutton my top button, roll up the sleeves a couple of times, throw the jacket over my shoulder. I can dress down, right? I can always relax the way I look if I start at the higher level. But if I started looking like that business casual golf shirt and chinos, I can't then go in and quickly spiff it up and put the tie and jacket on. I'm going to look like a fool, right? So I'd rather start higher and work my way down in terms of how to dress for an interview. Now, also, your employer, the people you're talking to, so dress appropriate to them. If it's a flashy company, you can get away with a little more flash, but you're in a conservative type role typically, so you probably want to dress a little more conservatively. Before I go back to Ron's question in the chat, any thoughts on this? Okay. So I'm trying to distinguish how I would take this approach when addressing a screening interview as opposed to an interview with a hiring manager. Okay, so Ron, no matter what, we need to get the same information across and we need to get the same information out. So we've got to use the same process. The depth or the detail that we go into is going to be different. The types of questions we're going to be asked are going to be different, and the questions we're going to ask the screener are going to be different. But we're still going to go through the process, especially the first qualifier and the trial close, and end with that take me to the next step. So, the screener probably is going to ask about your salary requirements. So you're going to need to have some number to give them. I'm still going to ask, what's the salary range? What's the budget for this position? Or I'm going to probably, before I give them a number, say something like, I know this position is valued in the industry at X to Y. That salary range is appropriate to me. But I don't want to get pinned down if I can avoid it. Either way, I'm going to answer their questions. I'm going to ask them a few simpler questions appropriate to the screening, and then I'm going to move on to hire me, because I'm always going to ask for that job at the end. Your camera's working good now, so can just shake your head. Yes, no. Does that work for you? Okay. I heard the mouthing yes. So let's get to our our second to last tip. Just don't negotiate the salary, which I just was talking about. So anybody not a good negotiator? Okay. So I was talking with a client earlier today. She got a job offer last night, and she said, "Oh my God, Paul, I have to respond tomorrow, yes or no. I need to talk to you." So we found a few minutes this morning that I could talk to her. And the comment I gave to her was this: the good news is you've got an offer. They've decided they like you, they want you, they want to hire you. Now is your chance to get the best deal possible. So your response to the initial offer letter is going to be, "Hey, thanks for this. I've got some questions. I would really like the opportunity to talk to you so that I can get the answers to my questions before I give you a yes to the job. By the way, none of my questions are deal breakers, but I just want to make sure I know and understand fully what it is I'm saying yes to before I do that." And then you have your list of questions to ask. And you're going to ask all about the raises, the raise schedule. You're going to ask about the compensation package, the bonus structure. You're going to ask about the benefits. You're going to ask about all of the time off. You're going to all those questions and get all the answers. And oftentimes, I'm going to even go so far as to say, okay, can I see the costs of the healthcare? Now, depending on your salary level, that may not be so big of a deal that it's important, but for some of us, it may be important that, a $5,000 out of pocket every year is more than I want to give, right? So, get the information. Then you're going to say, okay, thank you. I need to think on it. Let me get back to you tomorrow. Is, 1 o'clock in the afternoon a good time for me to touch base and give you my response? So that you can be, very thoughtful about it. The other thing I'll often say to people who are not good negotiators, when they give you the number, you say, "Oh, okay," and then go silent. You might even start going down to your notepad and jotting some figures, or look like you're jotting figures, doing some math to say, okay, how can I make that number work? It's amazing the number of times that just that 30 seconds or minute of uncomfortable silence is enough for the interviewer to come back and say, "Well, if I gave you X plus, would that be good enough for you?" And you've not said a word, but you've gotten a raise right off the bat. So, you might want to try that. But if you need to, give me a call and I'm happy to help you more with some negotiation tactics. Hillary is asking if the deck can be available. Here's what I'll ask of you, Hillary, and anyone else on the call. I've put my contact information in already. I'll put it in the chat again. It'll also be on the last slide. Anyone who reaches out to me, I will happily provide you the slides, but I do ask that you contact me directly to get them, please. The final of our 13 tips is all about follow-up. So I want to share a story with you about follow-up. I was working with a young man. He was about 26, 27 years old. And he was pretty amazingly clear of what company he wanted to work for and why he wanted to work there. So it got to him and one other candidate, a 44, 45-year-old, something like that person, for the last two candidates for the offer. They ended up offering the other person the job. He went back to the hiring manager and said, I really, really love this company. I really want to work for you at some point in my career. I would love it if we could keep in touch. The interviewer had agreed to it. So a month later, he reached out to the interviewer and said, hey, I just want to let you know I'm still looking. Here's some of the things that have happened in my job search. By the way, here's what I've learned that since our interview, and I'm so glad that we've had the chance to talk. You know, if you ever get a chance to hire somebody for a position, I still want you to consider me for that role. 2 months go by. Hey, I saw this article in the news, thought it was pertaining to your organization. Love to share it with you. Tell me, what are your thoughts on it? 3 months goes by, 4, 5 months go by. Every month he's reaching out to this hiring manager and giving an update on his search and giving some information back that he found that's pertinent to the role or to the company. 6 months go by. The person they hired didn't work out, they fired her. They didn't interview another person for the job. They didn't advertise the job. They called him up and said, hey, the job's open. We want you to come work for us. Would you do it? He said, oh my gosh, I was just about to send you an email. 2 weeks ago, I accepted another position. I've been on the job for 2 weeks. It's really been good, but I got to tell you, it's not the same as what I think it'd be like working for you. Can you afford to give me 2 weeks time to give notice and then I'll come work for you? That was 13 years and 3 promotions ago. This guy has been that happy to be working at this company. He got the job for one reason alone. He followed up with the interviewer. He never let the conversation end. I know of a senior sales executive. He contacted the senior VP of sales for the company he wanted to work for 28 times in 28 weeks. For literally 6 months, he contacted this employer every week trying to set up a time to talk to this VP. Finally, after the 28th phone call, the VP called him back and said, okay, you wore me down. It's been 28 weeks. Who are you and why do I need to talk to you? 3 weeks later, he started working. He's been the #1 salesman at that company for the last 7 years. Follow-up is critical to success. Any thoughts, questions, or comments here?
Paul, it's been an amazing talk. Thank you so much.
Sure. So here are the 13 tips in total. Feel free to ask me any questions about any of them. You know, I good. There's some upcoming presentations that I've got. Next week I'll be doing one. I've got a couple in May. And a couple weeks ago, I started a training program, Project Planning Your Job Search, for a group of people laid off from state universities. But if you or anyone you know would be interested in a 6-session, 12-hour, focused course on job search, I'd be happy to do it for you. Just let me know. If you're interested in any of these presentations or any others that I have coming up, feel free to reach out either to me or to these people and get access to those presentations. I also manage or facilitate a bunch of job seeker support groups and welcome your participation in any of those. They're similar to this in terms of there being a group. The only one that's a speakers group, though, is Professional Support Group of Morris County, and that meets by Zoom on Wednesday mornings. The rest of these are strategic support groups. By that, I mean everybody on the call, and there's usually about 10 to 15 people. We take about 2 hours. Everybody on the call gets 10 minutes. And that 10 minutes, we're focused on you. Give us your intro, tell us what's going on in your job search, and give us the biggest challenge that you have in your job search. And then the rest of us on the call will brainstorm together with you to come up with ways to resolve that challenge for you. people find them to be the best 2 hours they spend in their job search on any given week. And so if you're interested in any of those, I absolutely would love to have you come join us. The executive and job transition meets on Monday, and that's at 10 a.m. That would probably be the best one for any of you. Of course, if you happen to be in the LGBTQ community, you can join us for that one. Do we have anybody who's under 30 on the call? I don't see any faces that maybe look like they're under, maybe a bunch of us that wish we were. But this group is specifically for those who are under 30. There's my contact information again. I'm going to put it back in the chat again, and I'll take any last questions that anybody has before.
Well, this is super helpful, and I'm sure you were a FBI hostage negotiator in your prior life as well.
Thank you, Mark.
Can I ask, is there a series of how to broaden the top of the funnel? I feel with the advantage you provided us with today, we can all do better in the mid funnel. But how do we? Is there someone that or some series that we can do to increase the funnel on the top?
So Mark, ask Dennis, number one, but number two, I do actually a whole presentation that's about an hour long, just on how to best target your job search.
Okay.
And so I'd be happy to share that with folks. If you want me to come back and do it to the group, I'm happy to do that. We can work that a bunch of different ways.
Yeah, let's try to get you back either June, July, or August. So sooner the better. Talk about. I think what Mark's asking about is super helpful to broaden it so we have more seeds planted.
So I would just say, that's a long, relatively long time away for job seekers. Anybody wants to talk about the process, feel free to connect with me.
Okay. And I'll also offer this, which I offer to everybody all the time. Dennis can attest to this. If any of you at any time have a quick question that you want a quick answer to, I'll be pissed off if you don't call me and ask the question. All right, so please reach out, and if it's 5-10 minutes, I'm happy to answer at no cost. If I need to do 30 minutes or more, I'm going to tell you that up front, and then we'll decide, do we go with the Reader's Digest version and then you figure it out yourself, or do we plan for the 30 minutes and you pay me for that? Second, I never ever want money to get in the way of someone getting a job. So no matter what your situation is, we'll find a way to work out the cost of my services for you to take advantage of them, because the world is a better place when you're working. And so I want to do everything I can to help you with that.